New Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver met with the South Florida media yesterday and offered a very impressive 20-plus minute press conference to introduce himself to Dolphins Nation. What stood out the most? What are the impressions? That's here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. And today, it's Friday, February 16th, 2024. And we met Anthony Weaver as a member of the Miami Dolphins for the first time yesterday. A very impressive 24-minute press conference. The expectation has always been that Anthony Weaver is going to come in and wow you with his ability to offer good perspective. And his presence at the podium has, going back to his time in Houston, been something that as a coach has become very apparent and very evident. And I think there's a lot of takeaways from Anthony Weaver's press conference, from the excitement that he had about a number of players on the roster, to his mentality, which you very clearly see the parallels to Mike McDaniel, and you heard that firsthand from Anthony Weaver himself. And some of the parallels that he pointed to between his prior stop in Baltimore and the Dolphins, as far as common themes between that franchise, which has become a gold standard of consistency across the NFL, and where this Miami Dolphins team is at now with a key difference. So we are going to dive into a lot of thoughts from Anthony Weaver here today on the show. I'm looking forward to letting you guys hear from Anthony Weaver himself. So with that in mind, the first clip that stood out to me was one that came when he was asked very early in the press conference about the kind of scheme that he plans to bring to Miami, because this has been the big mystery. He had a year as a defensive coordinator in Houston, but that was under Bill O'Brien with Romeo Crennel. Like, how much of that was his defense? And then he goes to Baltimore and is under Mike Macdonald and under Wink Martindale. A lot of different experiences and backgrounds. And he was asked about what kind of scheme he wants to bring to Miami. Here's what Anthony Weaver had to say.
Yeah, I think the scheme that we use in Baltimore is actually extremely multiple and flexible. And the foundation of what we're going to do here will be from that. But the beauty in that is a lot of the things that they've already done here that they've had success in, we're very similar there. So there should be a lot of crossover teaching. But I think in this league, it's hard to just pigeonhole yourself as one particular thing, because you're going to face different situations throughout the entire year, whether it's weather, injuries. There's a multitude of factors, and your scheme better be flexible enough to, one, adapt to the players and adapt to whatever situation you may be in. So
he didn't necessarily hide the intent, right? And there's been times where people have taken jobs and there's a mystery factor and you don't know what it's really going to look like. Well, the infrastructure of the Baltimore Ravens defense the past several seasons, but whether it be Wink Martindale or Mike Macdonald, is what is coming to the Miami Dolphins. And I think you think about the Mike Macdonald approach to defense, more aggressive than Vic Fangio, but also very good at simulated pressures and schemed pressure opportunities. That's some of the parallel that I think you'll see is the simulated pressures element of this defense that Miami has had versus the defense that we're anticipating now, courtesy of the words of Anthony Weaver, is going to be brought into the picture here. There's more teasing of the differences, specifically as it pertains to Jalen Ramsey. We'll talk about that one in just a minute. But I think you really look at this Mike Macdonald defensive system and the ways that it really maximized a number of values. It maximized Jadeveon Clowney. It maximized Justin Madubuike. It maximized Kyle Hamilton as a star defensive player. The other safeties in the group, Hamilton was a guy who spent time in the nickel. He spent time low. He spent time in the box. He spent time deep. That yielded for Geno Stone and for Marcus Williams a lot of good opportunities to get reps on the back end as deep coverage players. So I think you probably have a more wide coverage net that can be cast as a result. I think you'll see similarities in how they choose to attack from a pressure or simulated pressure standpoint. But then I also think that the missing element, which is kind of it giveth and it taketh away. The Fangio system was rooted in static presentation all the time. And the reason for that is we don't want to give the quarterback any pre-snap cues as far as what our intent is for the play. So by leaving everything as vanilla as possible, you're forcing the quarterback to do all of the work after the snap with the ball in his hands. This is a lot more player and mismatch centric as compared to scheme centric. So I'm not saying it's better or worse, right? I think the Brian Flores defense was scheme centric. I think the Mike McDaniel offense is player centric. So there's ways in which there can be success on either side of that individual fence. But just based off of Anthony Weaver, hearing him talk about the foundation principles from Baltimore being what's going to be run here in Miami, and then parlaying that off of what he had to say about Jalen Ramsey, which we're going to get into here next on the show, paints a very clear picture for me. This is going to be a talent featuring player-centric scheme as compared to making the players operate within the rules and restrictions of the scheme. It's a big difference. It's a big change. And it should be for the better when you have allocated talent in the way that the Dolphins have. We're going to talk about one player in specific, Jalen Ramsey, and what Anthony Weaver said about him up next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So stick with us. DoorDash went all out for game day with the big game, and they stuffed all kinds of deliverables from all kinds of ads from the big game, and they DoorDashed them to one lucky winner: cars, snacks, and even tax software. I am still a little sour about our friends over at DoorDash not DoorDashing me all of those goods, but they did pull it off. It was one heck of a delivery. You got to hand it to them. DoorDash is the all-in-one app for all of your everyday needs, from restaurants to groceries to flowers to gifts. So the next time you're running low on dinner ideas, pet supplies, or just time, there's so much more that you can get realized. Whatever watch party or anything party you have coming up, get it delivered with DoorDash. Get dinner for tonight, groceries for the week, or a consolation prize for your sad friends in San Francisco for losing the Super Bowl, all in DoorDash. DoorDash, your door to more. Head on over to the DoorDash app and get everything you need delivered. When the Dolphins made the decision to move on from Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator, a mutually agreed upon decision, that's at least how it was presented. I tend to agree with that, but I do think it was not either side hoping that it would work out, just based off everything that we've heard and putting the context clues together before the decision was made. The reporting indicated that there was a number of player feedback that seemed to voice displeasure in how certain elements of this Dolphins defense operated. None more obvious than Jalen Ramsey, given Jalen Ramsey being asked from the media throughout the course of the season about what your role is this week. How are you going to travel with a receiver? And the way Jalen Ramsey answered those questions made it very apparent that's not my decision. It's somebody else's decision, so you should ask him. And then you parlay that with what Anthony Weaver said about how the Baltimore infrastructure is going to be what Miami runs. And then you hear what he says when he is explicitly asked about Jalen Ramsey. This is as good of a soundbite as you can get for the understanding of why this was the direction that the team chose. Here's Anthony Weaver on Jalen Ramsey as a presence in his defense.
I mean, it's Jalen Ramsey. I mean, come on now. Like, you talk about prototype corners. He is that, right? Size, length, speed, competitiveness. The thing about him is I think he's your ultimate chess piece. So to have him just sit outside and, be a field corner or boundary corner or something like that, I think is a detriment to him. We got to find ways to move him around where he can be most impactful. And we're committed to doing that.
Well, that says a lot. And it says a lot, I guess, directly in conflict with the way that it was approached with Vic Fangio. And I don't believe that Anthony Weaver intended to come up and cast any shade at Vic Fangio when he comes up for his introductory press conference. But there are a number of things that have been said, including that statement right there about leaving Jalen Ramsey as a static presence as either a field or a boundary corner being a detriment to him, and that we need to find ways to optimize him and maximize his impact is the ultimate chess piece. These were the things that we talked about in March and April when the Dolphins acquired Jalen Ramsey. The biggest thing that stood out was, well, in this scheme with other coaches, he's playing in the nickel, he could play outside, he could play deep safety. All those things that we just got done talking about the Baltimore Ravens defense has done so well with Kyle Hamilton. None of those things happened this year with Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey played lockdown outside corner, and opposing quarterbacks said, okay, we're just going to throw to the other side of the field, or we're going to target an inexperienced nickel corner, take advantage of constant inconsistencies with who's playing with the safeties, and attack the linebackers. In the back half of the season, the last month of the season, had a backup player in there, and attack their communication ability to cover the middle of the field in this zone match defense. We're not going to throw it outside of Jalen Ramsey. So you hear that there's player feedback as far as the way the season went. You know that dynamic existed with Jalen Ramsey. You're now hearing what the vision is for Jalen Ramsey specifically within this defense. You know that track record exists, and it's what we expected when the Dolphins acquired Jalen Ramsey in the first place. You start to put the pieces of this puzzle together, and it becomes very apparent that this is not going to be a team that is going to allow opponents to take your best players out of the game by simply structure. And that was an issue for the Dolphins on both sides of the ball last year, right? We talked about that late down the stretch. We've talked about it a ton in the month of February and January about structurally taking away your running game and needing to do something to ensure that you have the confidence in that dynamic of your offense, even when the defensive structure changes. Offensive structure taking away Jalen Ramsey. I mean, is it a coincidence that he makes these big time plays in the first month that he comes back from the knee injury, the meniscus? He has the interception that's almost a pick six against the Pats. He has 2 picks against the Raiders. And that was within a 4-week stretch. And then we said, oh, okay, yeah, we're just not going to throw him out anymore. And magically he disappears. Knowing that this is the intent, say what you will about the other side of the ball, but the hire of Mike McDaniel was made with maximizing talent, specifically maximizing the talent of the quarterback that they had invested in. It was on a rookie contract, and people within the organization believed in, even though the performance through his first 2 seasons did not warrant a lot of enthusiasm. And say what you will about the ceiling, Mike McDaniel's primary objective as being hired as the head coach of the football team, aside of coaching the football team, was to maximize his quarterback. He's done that. On the other side of the ball, with a coach like Anthony Weaver, and look, we may not have him very long. Very, very impressive. And if this Dolphins defense explodes the way that it's capable of, you may see Anthony Weaver being a head coach next offseason cycle, right? You saw D'Amico Ryans is a good example of a defensive-minded coach. Jerome Mayo, a couple defensive-minded background coaches. And Mayo's a little bit of a unique example in New England because he's kind of just been pegged as the the heir to Belichick for the past couple of years. But these as much as one of the trends of head coach hiring is young offensive minds, young defensive coaches who are players coaches, they're also getting a little bit of shine right now through the last couple of coaching cycles. So mindful that Anthony Weaver might be here for a good time, not for a long time, and that's okay. But knowing that we're entering into this offseason with how do we maximize our best players on defense as compared to how do we master the scheme to allow the scheme to do the lifting for us is a little bit of a different headspace. And I think when Jimmy's and Joe's transcend X's and O's, and that does happen in the NFL, that's how margins are won, right? Because scheme can only carry you so far until players have to flip the switch and take it over themselves. And I know that's one of the criticisms of the offensive side of the ball is the players didn't take over that side of the ball and make enough plays beyond the X's and O's down the stretch last season, right? So it cuts both ways on both sides of the ball. But defensively with the change, I think you're getting a lot more energy out of the players themselves. And we're going to talk about Anthony Weaver's ideology with players here in just a moment. That's up next here on Locked On Dolphins, so stick with us. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. The class executive Google built-in is your always updating assistant on call for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone to your car. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure, while the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Speaking of shade at Vic Fangio, one of the comments that was included from Mike McDaniel when it was announced that Anthony Weaver was being hired as the coach, Mike McDaniel referenced player development being a critical, and I'm paraphrasing here from Mike, a critical part of long-term team building and success. And Anthony Weaver's belief in player development being in line with what the Dolphins want to be, right? Well, the godfather of Locked On Dolphins, Travis Wingfield, who obviously is with the team now, he's the in-house media correspondent, I think is how you would describe what Travis does for the team. Anyway, he was the host of Locked On Dolphins. He got hired by the Dolphins. That tells you everything you need to know about Travis. Travis asked Anthony Weaver an admittedly broad question, but asked him, what are your thoughts on player development? Which I'm glad that Travis asked that, because Mike McDaniel's inclusion of that in the introductory portion of Anthony Weaver's hiring, I thought was particularly interesting, especially when you cross-reference it against, there have been some young players that were on the roster last year and that didn't necessarily get the run or the shine or the playing time that a lot of fans hoped and expected that they would. We talked about, Vic Fangio had this very narrow list of players that he had the confidence in. It was about 13 players deep for 11 players on the field at any given time. You had a nose tackle that rotated in, you had a nickel cornerback that rotated in, and then you had a third pass rusher who had off-ball linebacker capabilities in Andrew Van Ginkel. And when injuries took hold on that side of the ball, it really whittled away and forced players that you could tell Vic kind of didn't have the same appetite for playing based on who played when the defense was healthy. And yet you still didn't see Cam Smith as just an example. You didn't see Channing Tindall at all. And is that by fault of the players? Is that by fault of the coaching staff? Is that by fault of both? It's very difficult to know from the outside. But if Mike McDaniel's going to make a point when he hires Anthony Weaver that player development is a critical part of who we want to be in long-term success, and Anthony Weaver is a fit with this organization because of his beliefs in that regard, in addition to other things, that means something to me. So to hear what Anthony Weaver had to say about player development, I think it's very helpful to help further paint the picture. Let's hear from Anthony Weaver.
I think you need to be grounded in your technique and fundamentals. It starts there. So every coach that's on staff certainly believes in that. And the guys that have been here, you see that with their guys on tape. Once you're sound there, that allows you to unleash whatever God-given ability you have. Without it, like sometimes you can just be flailing around a little bit. I call it like, it's like the story of the prodigal son, right? He leaves, things get awry, comes back home, and your dad's just sitting there with open arms. Your technique and fundamentals are the same way. Like if you go awry from it, like things can get crazy. All right, come back to your technique and fundamentals. It'll be sitting there in open arms, and things will get right.
Yeah. Anthony Weaver obviously has perspective on this because he's a former longtime player in the league, and he was asked throughout the course of the interview about the media availability about his experience as a player and how that helps him as a coach, and what perspective that offers to him as a coach as well. And I think anytime you have a former player who is in the younger demographic, you see how well they continue to connect with their players. And that being something that is another part of this puzzle the Dolphins culturally are trying to put together from a coaching staff perspective. I think somebody who himself had to learn, and he told a story about as an 18-year-old true freshman at Notre Dame, how he played early and did not play. He was very tentative in the first half, but then as the game wore on, he trusts his technique and fundamentals, and he helps force a big play when Notre Dame forces an upset in one of his early starts in his true freshman season. And those kinds of perspectives give you the ability to relate to young players to help them continue to buy in what you are selling and what you are trying to accomplish. And Anthony Weaver said it himself, it's a long season. There's all kinds of adversity that hits. And somebody made the joke about, I think it was Travis, adversity is opportunity, and asked if he had heard that one yet. He had not, by the way, but he did acknowledge that a lot of the coaches were off and not in the building. So I know everybody rolls their eyes with adversity is opportunity because we heard it 10 times a week, every week for the final month of the season. Anthony Weaver being somebody who I think has a strong opportunity just based on listening to him speak, listening to his perspective on what he brings as a coach. I think if you can continue to connect with the players, you can further cultivate the trust. And it sounded like one of the things that was broken by the end of last season was a trust between the staff defensively, Vic, and some of the key players, especially those who did not play. And anytime Vic was asked about Cam Smith, what does he got to get better at? He's just got to keep getting better at his fundamentals, right? He asked Cam Smith, I just got to keep getting better at my fundamentals. Well, Anthony Weaver is going to come in, he's going to talk about the same thing, but does a different person and personal exchange. And I'm just using Cam Smith as a singular example. This applies to everybody. Will a different approach facilitate a better response? It's the same way as teaching. Not everybody learns the same way. This is one thing that me being in this space and engaging with fans of this show who want to learn more about the game and watch film or learn about the salary cap. Some people learn by seeing. Some people learn by hearing. Some people learn by using their hands and doing. And I think if you don't cater to that, and this is just a personal belief of mine from my own experiences, but also from sports psychology understanding with my degree in kinesiology, all that kind of stuff. If you don't meet people where they are wired and where they work, it's going to take longer, and the process is not going to be as smooth for them learning whatever skill, task, idea that you're trying to communicate. So there's an element of Anthony Weaver that is still unknown, right? He was a defense coordinator in Houston. He joked about don't take a job where the global pandemic hits as one of his learning lessons from that 2020 season. But that team was short on talent anyway, right? Then he goes to Baltimore, And it's other people's schemes. It's Wink Martindale's schemes. It's Mike McDonald's schemes. So we don't know that component of his ability to apply it. But what we do know is if there's a collaborative effort, this is somebody who is going to mesh very well with the collective group the Dolphins have put together. And I think that's a step in the right direction because it is a people business, just like every other business in the world. And they have the talent on the field to execute at a high level. They still do. And they still will, even if there are some losses courtesy of free agency next month. We got more coming. We got a lot of ground to cover here on Locked On Dolphins. I hope you guys enjoyed this dive into Anthony Weaver and his introductory press conference as the defensive coordinator of the Miami Dolphins. It is your team every day. You can find me on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Thanks for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Enjoy the weekend. I'll be back to talk to y'all again on Monday.